Remember the last time we talked about death traps? Those cities that become crematoriums the moment the trucks stop rolling? The places where 8 million hungry people discover there's only enough food for 3 days and enough civility for about two. Los Angeles, Phoenix, Miami, Vegas. They are beautiful places to visit, but terrible places to starve. I showed you where you die. Now let's talk about where you live. Here is what most people get catastrophically wrong about survival. They picture a cabin in the woods. Just them, a rifle, and a dog named something rugged like Diesel. They imagine hunting deer every morning and filtering stream water through their flannel shirt. Maybe there is a sunset involved. Maybe some acoustic guitar on the porch. It is romantic, cinematic, and completely historically stupid. Every piece of data we have on civilizational collapse tells the same story. Lone wolves do not survive. They get picked off. They get sick. They run out of antibiotics or bullets or hope. The human animal is a pack creature, and when you try to solo the apocalypse, you are not playing on hard mode. You are playing without a save file. Communities survive, networks survive, places where your neighbor knows your name, knows your skills, and has a vested interest in you not dying because you are the only one who can fix the generator. So, we went looking. Not for bunkers, not for hideouts, not for some fantasy compound where you can roleplay as a warlord. We went looking for real American cities, places that exist right now with functioning economies and grocery stores and high school football teams. Places that also happen to have the geology, the resources, the infrastructure, and the culture to keep functioning when everywhere else goes dark. We found 10. 10 cities that pass what we call the fortress test. 10 places where if you position yourself correctly, you do not just survive the collapse, you inherit what comes after. But before I hand you this list, I need to give you something more valuable. Because a list without context is just trivia, and trivia won't save you when the lights go out. I am going to teach you how we evaluated these cities, the exact methodology, and the 3 layers we examined so that you can audit any location anywhere and know whether it is a fortress or a coffin. This is the survival audit, how to grade your geography. Most people think they know what makes a place safe. They will say things like low crime rate or good schools or nice views of the mountains. And sure, those things are lovely when Amazon delivers in 2 days and the police respond in 10 minutes. But we are not talking about normal times. We are talking about the grid going down permanently. We are talking about the moment when calling 911 becomes a nostalgic memory like rotary phones or affordable housing. In that world, the metrics change completely. So before I reveal the list, you need to know how to audit a city yourself. Does your current town pass what we call the 3-layer fortress test? Because if it doesn't, you are not living in a home. You are living in a trap with nice curtains. Layer 1 is the kinetic buffer. This is the first and most brutal calculation. When a major metropolitan area collapses, when New York or Los Angeles or Chicago runs out of food and water and hope, what happens? You know what happens. You have seen it in every disaster movie, every history book, and every news report from every failed state. People move. 8 million people in New York City, 3 days of food on the shelves. That is 24 million meals. After that, the math gets ugly. People do not sit quietly and accept starvation. They get in their cars and they drive. They drive toward anything they think might have food, water, or shelter. They drive towards smaller towns, toward farms, toward you. This isn't fear-mongering. This is fluid dynamics. People flow like water toward the path of least resistance. So we calculate the kinetic buffer. How far is your city from the nearest major metro collapse zone? And more importantly, can a desperate mob reach you on 1 tank of gas? The average American car gets about 350 to 400 miles on a full tank. That is your kill radius. That is the circle of chaos that expands outward from every dying megacity. If you live within 400 miles of New York, LA, or Chicago, or Houston or Phoenix, you are inside the blast zone. You are on the menu. It might take a few days, it might take a few weeks, but eventually the wave reaches you. The cities on our list sit outside that radius, way outside. They are in what we call the empty quarter of America, the places that most people forget exist until they need them. Distance isn't glamorous, but distance is survival. Layer 2 is caloric independence. Here is a statistic that will ruin your day. The average American city has a 3-day food supply. That is it. 3 days. Everything you see on every grocery store shelf in your entire metro area would be consumed in 72 hours if the resupply trucks stopped rolling. And they will stop rolling because trucking runs on diesel and diesel runs on refineries. And refineries run on electricity, and electricity runs on a grid that is held together by prayers and deferred maintenance. When the grid fails, the trucks stop. When the trucks stop, the shelves empty. When the shelves empty, you have about 48 hours before things get medieval. So we calculate caloric independence. Does your region produce more calories than it consumes? If the supply chain collapses, can your city feed itself? This is why most coastal cities fail the fortress test immediately. San Francisco doesn't grow food, it orders food. It has a population density of 18,000 people per square mile and agricultural output of approximately zero. Compare that to the heartland, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, the places that New Yorkers fly over and forget about. These regions produce enough grain to feed continents, literal continents. The caloric surplus is so massive that even in a grid-down scenario, even with no tractors and no combines, even reverting to horse-drawn plows and hand harvesting, there would still be enough food. But calories are only half the equation. You can't eat without drinking. So we also calculate water access, and not just any water, gravity-fed water, aquifer water, spring water, water that doesn't require electricity to pump, doesn't require treatment plants to purify, and doesn't require a functioning municipal infrastructure to deliver. The cities on our list sit on top of massive aquifers or next to rivers and lakes that flow regardless of whether anyone is paying the electric bill. Layer 3 is the culture. This is where the math gets fuzzy and the psychology gets real. Because here's the truth nobody wants to admit. In a collapsed scenario, your neighbors aren't just people who live near you. They are your greatest asset or your biggest threat. There is no middle ground. You have seen the footage from every disaster. Hurricane Katrina, the LA riots, any grid failure anywhere. Two types of communities emerge. Type 1, the communities that band together, where people share resources, coordinate defense, and pool skills. Where the guy who can weld teams up with the guy who can grow tomatoes and the woman who used to be an ER nurse. These communities stabilize. They rebuild. They become the seeds of whatever comes next. Type 2, the communities that fracture, where it is every man for himself, where people hoard and hide and view every neighbor as a potential competitor. These communities collapse faster than the infrastructure they were built on. So how do we measure which type your city will become? We look at proxies. We look at gun ownership rates, not because guns magically solve problems, but because high gun ownership indicates a culture of self-reliance. We look at religious and community organization density, churches, temples, civic clubs, any institution that gets people in the same room regularly, building trust and relationships. Because when the crisis hits, you don't form a community from scratch. You activate the community that already exists. We look at agricultural heritage, places where people still remember how to grow food, slaughter animals, and preserve meat. Skills that most of America outsourced to factories 3 generations ago, but that some regions never quite forgot. The cities on our list score high on all these metrics. Now that you have the methodology and understand the 3 layers, let's see which American cities actually pass the test. The first tier is the reliable backups, cities 10 through 7. These are the places that pass the fortress test with solid grades but have 1 or 2 asterisks next to their names. They are not perfect, but they are dramatically better than 95% of American addresses. Number 10 is Bangor, Maine, the deep freeze. Let's start at the edge of the map. Bangor sits in the northeast corner of America, which sounds like it should be dangerously close to the Boston, New York, D.C. corridor of death. But look at an actual map and the roads. To get from Boston to Bangor, you drive 250 miles through some of the most sparsely populated territory on the East Coast. The roads narrow, the towns shrink, and the wilderness closes in. Maine has a population density of about 45 people per square mile. For reference, New Jersey has over 1,200. Bangor itself is tiny with 32,000 people, but it is the service hub for an enormous swath of northern Maine, which means it has infrastructure that punches above its weight class: hospitals, supply chains, and trade networks. The natural resources are insane. Maine is 89% forested. That is not a typo. Almost 90% of the state is trees. In a grid-down scenario, heating fuel is the difference between life and death in northern climates, and Bangor is sitting on an effectively infinite supply of firewood. Water is everywhere: rivers, lakes, and streams. Maine has over 6,000 lakes. The Kinetic buffer is excellent. Boston refugees would have to travel 250 miles on increasingly rural roads through increasingly hostile terrain in an increasingly cold climate. Most won't make it. Here's the catch. Those winters are brutal, regularly hitting 20°C. The growing season is short, about 4 months. If you don't know how to preserve food, if you don't have serious cold weather gear, or if you can't keep a fire burning reliably, Maine will kill you faster than any mob. For people with cold weather skills, Bangor offers isolation, resources, and a population that has been doing hard mode living for generations. Score: B+. Number 9 is Provo, Orem, Utah, the hive mind. Most survival analysts focus on geography and ignore culture. They calculate water tables and forget to calculate trust. Provo is the counterexample. Community cohesion is so strong, so structured, and so deeply embedded that it becomes a survival asset more valuable than any aquifer. This is the heart of Mormon country. And regardless of your personal feelings about any particular religion, the Mormon culture of preparedness is objectively fascinating from a survival standpoint. The LDS Church has been telling its members to maintain a 1-year food supply since 1936. That is almost 90 years of institutional pressure toward household preparedness. Most basements in the Provo-Orem area literally contain 12 months of stored food, stored water, and stored essentials. Think about what that means. In most American cities, 3 days after the truck stop, people are desperate. In Provo, 3 days after the truck stop, people are reaching for the stuff on the back shelf. The panic threshold is pushed out by months, but it is not just the stored food, it is the social structure. The LDS Church operates on a ward system, small geographic units of a few hundred families, each with established leadership, communication channels, and systems for identifying and helping those in need. When crisis hits, this structure doesn't need to be invented. It activates. Every member knows their neighbors. Every neighborhood has coordinated resources. Geography helps too. The Wasatch Range provides a natural barrier to the west, and the Great Salt Lake provides another buffer far from any major collapse zone. The catch? This community cohesion is closely tied to religious participation. If you are not LDS, you are not automatically part of the network. You can build relationships, earn trust, and integrate over time, but you don't get instant access. This isn't a city you drop into on day zero. This is a city you move to now, spend years building relationships in, and reap the benefits when things go sideways. Score: A for members of the network, C for outsiders. Number 8 is Des Moines, Iowa, the infinite buffet. Let's talk about the most underrated survival asset in America. Iowa. Nobody's Instagram features Iowa. No one writes songs about the corn. It is flat, rural, and boring. It is also surrounded by enough food to feed 100 million people. Des Moines sits in the center of the most productive agricultural region in human history. That is not hyperbole. The American Midwest produces more calories per acre than any farming region that has ever existed. The topsoil here is measured in feet, not inches. The rainfall is reliable. When we calculate caloric independence, Des Moines doesn't just pass, it aces the test. Iowa alone produces enough corn to feed the entire state for years. Most goes to ethanol and animal feed. Redirect a fraction toward humans, and the caloric surplus is staggering. Water comes from the Des Moines River and the Raccoon River, which is more than sufficient. The Kinetic buffer is strong. Chicago is 300 miles away, and the route goes through rural Illinois before hitting even more rural Iowa. The culture is what you'd expect from farm country: self-reliant, practical and community-oriented in the way that rural areas have to be. Because when your nearest neighbor is a mile away, you learn to help each other. The catch is weather. Iowa gets hot in summer, cold in winter, and tornado season is a real thing. But here is what people miss. In a grid-down scenario, every skill related to farming, food production, and food preservation becomes infinitely more valuable than whatever you currently do. This is the place where those skills are still common. And if you want to guarantee you never starve, move to Iowa. Score B+. Number 7 is Knoxville, Tennessee, the Crossroads Citadel. Most people drive past Knoxville on their way to Nashville or Atlanta. That is their mistake. Knoxville sits in one of the most strategically advantageous geographic positions in the eastern United States. It is where the Tennessee River meets the Appalachian Mountains and where major transportation routes intersect. Let's talk about water first. The Tennessee River is one of the largest river systems in America. In a grid-down scenario, that river becomes a transportation network that doesn't require gasoline. Boats move supplies and trade continues. The Tennessee Valley Authority built over 49 dams in this region. That is hydroelectric power that keeps flowing, regardless of what happens to the coal plants or the natural gas pipelines. When the rest of the country goes dark, the TVA system keeps generating. The Appalachian Mountains provide natural barriers to mass refugee movement from the East Coast. The roads through the mountains are narrow, winding, and easily blocked. Meanwhile, Knoxville has access to the agricultural surplus of the Tennessee Valley. Not as massive as Iowa, but significant. The culture is classic Appalachian, self-reliant, independent, and tight-knit. People here know how to hunt, fish, garden, and help their neighbors. The catch is that Knoxville is the largest city on this list so far, with 500,000 in the metro area. That is both an asset and a liability, but the fundamentals are strong. Water, power, geography, and culture. Knoxville checks every box. Score B+. Let's pause here to address the bunker delusion. I know what some of you are thinking. Why not just buy a bunker? Why not go full compound in the desert? Why mess around with cities at all? Fair question. Let's address it directly. A bunker is not a survival strategy. A bunker is a very expensive coffin. Yes, they look impressive in the brochures: reinforced concrete, air filtration systems, years of stored food, and a big metal door that keeps out everyone who isn't you. For a short-term crisis, a bunker can be useful to ride out initial chaos and wait for violence to burn out. But here is what the bunker salesmen don't tell you. You cannot grow food in a bunker. Photosynthesis requires sunlight. You cannot build community in a bunker. The moment you close that door, you've cut yourself off from every relationship, every skill, and every resource that exists outside. Eventually, you run out of something. What then? You either open the door or die behind it. You cannot trade from a bunker. Trade is survival. Exchange keeps economies alive and keeps communities stable. A bunker removes you from that network entirely. And the desert locations most bunkers are built in are terrible for long-term survival. No water, no arable land, and extreme temperatures. These 10 cities aren't bunkers. They're functioning mini-economies that can restart civilization. A bunker is a statement that says, I believe humanity is over, and I'm prolonging the inevitable. A fortress city is a statement that says, I believe humanity continues, and I'm positioning myself for what comes next. Your choice, but choose wisely. The second tier consists of the hardened zones, cities 6 through 4. These don't just pass the fortress test, they pass with flying colors. Number 6 is Casper, Wyoming, the empty quarter. Let's talk about population density and why empty is beautiful. Casper has about 60,000 people. The entire state of Wyoming has under 600,000. That is fewer people in the whole state than in a single neighborhood of some major cities. Denver Metro alone has over 2.8 million. This emptiness is not a bug, it's the primary feature. The kinetic buffer here is measured in hundreds of miles of absolutely nothing. Between Casper and Denver lies 300 miles of high plains, mountains, and sparse settlements. Any refugee column attempting that crossing would face fuel problems, weather problems, and a landscape that offers nothing along the way. If they somehow made it, they'd arrive in a region where everyone knows everyone. Strangers stand out immediately, and the local population has been armed and independent for generations. But Casper offers more than isolation. It offers energy. Wyoming floats on energy reserves: coal, oil, natural gas, and wind. The state produces more coal than any other in the nation. In a grid-down scenario, Casper could conceivably power itself. Water comes from the North Platte River, not abundant, but sufficient for a small population. The catch is the harsh climate, cold winters and hot summers. But the same toughness that makes the land unforgiving has shaped a population used to taking care of itself. Score A. Number 5 is Lubbock, Texas, the independent republic. Forget Houston, forget Dallas, forget Austin. Those are death traps, too big, too dependent, and too close to chaos. Lubbock is different. Lubbock sits on the high plains of West Texas, 350 miles from Dallas, 350 miles from Houston, and almost 500 miles from Austin. It is so far from major population centers that most Texans forget it exists. Here is the infrastructure story. Texas operates on its own electrical grid, ERCOT, one of only 3 major grid interconnections in the U.S. Unlike the eastern and western interconnections, ERCOT is almost entirely self-contained within Texas. When the national grid fails, Texas has a chance of keeping its own lights on. Lubbock benefits from this independence while being geographically isolated from the Texas Triangle, where most of the state's 30 million people live. The Ogallala Aquifer sits underneath, one of the largest in the world. Agriculture is massive. West Texas cotton, cattle ranching, and grain farming. The culture is aggressively Texan, self-reliant, and well-armed. Communities don't wait for government help. The catch: West Texas is hot, semi-arid territory, but semi-arid with an aquifer beneath you beats temperate without one. Score A. Number 4 is Bismarck, North Dakota, the fortress of solitude. Now we go north, way north. Bismarck is the capital of North Dakota, population 75,000. The entire state has under 800,000. It is cold, remote, and the butt of flyover jokes. It is also one of the most strategically positioned locations in North America. The Kinetic buffer is almost comical. The nearest major population center is Minneapolis, 450 miles away. Between them lies 450 miles of prairie, farmland, and nothing. Energy independence is Bismarck's superpower. North Dakota sits on the Bakken Formation, one of the largest oil reserves in North America, producing over 1 million barrels per day. But it's not just oil. There are coal reserves and wind farms. The Missouri River runs through Bismarck, providing hydroelectric potential and water simultaneously. In a grid-down scenario, Bismarck could power itself, heat itself, and feed itself. Here is the dark strategic advantage: the cold. North Dakota winters regularly hit 20, 30, or 40-degree Fahrenheit. For locals who understand the cold, it is manageable. For unprepared refugees arriving midwinter, the cold is a wall more effective than any human barrier. The catch is obvious. If you can't handle extreme cold, this place kills you. Score A. Finally, we reach the Holy Grails, the final 3. These are the cities that passed every layer with the highest marks. Number 3 is Rapid City, South Dakota, the Black Hills bastion. Rapid City is where the Great Plains meet the mountains. The result is a natural fortress. The Black Hills rise from the prairie like a geological anomaly, rugged, forested, and complicated terrain that is easy to defend and hard to invade. The Lakota Sioux considered these hills sacred, partly because they were strategically unassailable. The geography that protected them then protects a community now. Rapid City has 80,000 people, small enough to be manageable, large enough for infrastructure. Water is abundant with springs, streams, and small lakes everywhere. Rapid Creek runs through the city. The Kinetic buffer is massive. Denver is 400 miles away, and Minneapolis is 600. The Black Hills create natural choke points. Ellsworth Air Force Base provides security and skilled personnel. The culture is Western South Dakota, independent, practical, and community-oriented. The catch: It is isolated with limited economic opportunity in normal times. You're not moving for a career, you're moving for positioning. Score. Number 2 is the Ozarks, specifically Jefferson City and Springfield, Missouri, the Water Kingdom. Welcome to the Goldilocks Zone. The Ozarks are forested hills with limestone caves, natural springs, and some of the most abundant freshwater resources on the continent. The region sits on the Ozark Plateau aquifer, but more visibly, it's threaded with springs pouring fresh water continuously. Big Spring discharges 275 million gallons per day. One spring could supply a city of millions, and hundreds of springs exist here. There is Table Rock Lake, Bull Shoals Lake, and the Lake of the Ozarks. In a grid-down scenario, having gravity-fed spring water already filtered through limestone is game-changing. The terrain provides natural defense. The hills are steep, the hollows are deep, and the roads wind through valleys, creating choke points. The climate is moderate with a long growing season and 4 seasons without extremes. The culture is fiercely independent, well-armed, and self-reliant. Score. Number 1 is Kalispell and Whitefish, Montana, the American redoubt. Here it is. Kalispell and Whitefish sit in the Flathead Valley of northwestern Montana. If you design survival geography from scratch, you'd end up with something like this. The kinetic buffer is maximum. Seattle is 500 miles across the Cascades, Denver is over 700, and Minneapolis is 900. The route goes through mountain passes that close in winter and wilderness that gets harder every mile. Flathead Lake is the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi, over 190 square miles. No pumping is required. There is hydroelectric power from the Hungry Horse and Kerr dams. When the grid fails elsewhere, the hydro keeps spinning. The climate is harsh but manageable, as the mountains moderate temperature extremes. The terrain provides natural fortress characteristics, with the Rocky Mountains creating barriers in every direction. The valley has limited access points. Agriculture is strong with cattle, wheat, and orchards. The Flathead Valley produces more food than its population requires. The culture. The Flathead Valley is part of what survivalists call the American redoubt. For decades, survival-minded people have deliberately relocated here, building communities and networks. These aren't random preppers. This is a movement with decades of history and institutional knowledge. The result is a concentration of survival-oriented individuals higher than almost anywhere else in America. The catches: expensive real estate and a short growing season. Winters require preparation, but it might be the best place to survive. Score A+. In the final calculus, remember your move. These are 10 American cities that pass the fortress test, locations where geography, resources, and culture align. But let me be clear, a location is not a survival strategy. A location is a foundation. You can move to Kalispell tomorrow, but if you can't purify water, start a fire, dress a wound, or grow food, you die just as fast as someone in New York. Geography gives you a chance. Skills give you survival. Community gives you a future. These 3 things work together or they don't work at all. First, assess your current position honestly and run the 3 layers. Most of you will discover you're living in a death trap with nice restaurants. Second, if you're in a death trap, start planning your exit. Not panicking, but planning. Third, acquire skills now. Grow food, learn basic medical care, and fix machines. Fourth, build community wherever you are. The collapse won't announce itself, it will be a cascade. By the time most people realize what's happening, the window closes. The people who survive position themselves before the crisis. 10 cities, 3 layers, 1 life. If this breakdown changed the way you look at the map of your own backyard, please subscribe and like the channel. We are mapping the sanctuaries they don't want you to find. Secure your perimeter. The next survival blueprint will be released shortly.